All right, we've been sent a video to evaluate an implant for site number 31. This is one of our participants from our most recent integration workshop, and want to kind of review some of the things that we discussed there and take a look at the plan. So it looks like it's an edentulous site. Site number 31, and as always I always like to start with what are our guide options and what makes the most sense. And we can look here. We captured all of the mandible because this is a 8x8 volume machine. We've captured all of the mandible. We see our anatomy, so we have all the information we need. And the first thing I see is that this is a digital workflow. The digital workflow would then allow me to do OptiGuide, DigiGuide, or a CEREC Guide 2 milled in Office. So since we know exactly what we've got to do, we know that we need to bring in our CAD/CAM data. There's our restoration. There is our tooth data. And the great news here is we have all the data that we need for cross-arch stabilization. So we have OptiGuide as an option, DigiGuide as an option, and enough data for a CEREC Guide 2 as our option. So so now we have everything that we need. The first thing that I'm going to check in this particular case is the quality of our integration. So to do that, what I'd like to do is I like to go ahead and I like to go ahead and take a look at what our data looks like. In other words, what our virtual wax up looks like. And what I can see here is, generally speaking, this seems to be a pretty good design from the occlusal perspective. In other words, it's not too far buccal, it's not too far lingual, the tooth is not too wide, or the tooth is not too long mesiodistally. My one critique of this particular case would be the buccal margin contours. So if we were to draw a line for our gingival margins just like so, like here, we would see that our virtual tooth, our margin for our virtual tooth is much lower than our adjacent teeth. Okay, so we know that there's a high likelihood that this this margin is incorrect. So in all reality, this margin should have been drawn probably right there. Now, why does that matter? It matters because the vertical or apical placement of the implant should be determined by the free gingival margin location. So instead of being right here, our margin should be up there instead. So when we plan our implant, we'll have to adjust for that if we're taking a look into that into consideration. So we'll go to our implant, and here's the implant as it's planned. My first, again, thing that I take a look at here is we have a pretty short clinical crown. One of the things that we do know is that we want approximately 6 to 7 millimeters of vertical height above the implant for our restoration. I would prefer 7, maybe even 8 millimeters. How can we measure that? How can we know without using the measure tool? One of the things that we can do is we have our pilot drill path here. So to show our pilot drill path, one of the things we can do is we can change it. So I'll go to View, Customize, Implant, and we'll make our pilot drill path, instead of 18 millimeters, let's make it 8 millimeters long. Okay, so when I make it 8 millimeters long, we can see how much occlusal space that we have. And what I can see here is that at this point, we don't have necessarily an adequate amount of occlusal space here. Again, our absolute minimum we believe to be 6 millimeters, although I do think that's not enough. I would at least want 7 millimeters, and even with 7 millimeters, we don't quite have that height. So what is our solution to that? To me, the answer is quite simple. You would simply place the implant a little bit deeper, and now we would have our 7 millimeters of height. Now, why else would I do that? If we take a closer look, now what I would like to do is go ahead and, excuse me, I have the allergies. Go ahead and make this 15 millimeters long again so that we can see it extending through the tooth. What I would like to do here is just kind of give you an idea of why I would want this to be longer. So based on this, so we know that our platform itself is going to be a little bit above the implant. So look how bulbous that's going to be. That's going to be short. There's going to be a food trap right there. There's a lot of different things going here. So we have to from the implant to get proper emergence, we've got too quick. We don't have enough space to necessarily accomplish that. So I would, in this particular case, drop my implant down. And now if for example, I dropped it down to that level, then when I went to design, now you could see that I'd have enough space to properly design a good hygienic emergence profile. Now, how else could I determine the apical placement of my implant? We could also take and measure. We know that our apical placement should be approximately 3 millimeters, and remember this was drawn too low, so we'll probably say this is our apical length right there. So we know that we want our apex, the implant head, to be 3 millimeters below. So that line would leave my implant again about right there. So that would, in this particular case, be ideal emergence or apical locations to provide for adequate occlusal thickness and also adequate emergence profile. So this particular implant does need a subcrestal placement based on what's going on here. Now also, more than likely this tooth has been missing. There's been some super eruption of the opposing tooth, and that could be contributing to the shortened clinical crown there. So these are all the kind of things that I take a look, keep in mind as I'm planning. The other things that I take a look at in this particular plan is I see that my occlusal plane is up. So we know that a curve of speed does not look like that. So in this particular case, I would ideally like to put my implant a little bit more like that. Now we can see why we did not put that implant like that, because in doing so, to get our occlusal plane correct, we're too close to the root, and our implant, the screw hole is coming out the distal, as you can see over here in the axial view, and you can see here in the 3D view. So to accommodate for that, to gain adequate distance between this root, we need to place our implant probably about right here, okay, and then probably tilt that a little bit like so to get that in the center and get a proper support for our restoration to avoid any deep overhangs or for food traps. Other than that, I think our implant placement is pretty well done. I would say that the 5x10 is an adequate length here. It should be more than happy to support the implant restoration. We've got plenty of space here, using a precision guide to make sure that we're not going to create any major issues there. So hopefully this is helpful. It was a very good case to point out several things there. Thank you for submitting this, and have a great day.